Hello YouTube! In this video we're going to look at the coherence theory of truth. In the previous video on truth we looked at the correspondence theory. I'll put a link to that in the comments if you haven't seen it. But today, coherence theory of truth. Now the basic idea of the coherence theory is that truth consists in coherence. So a proposition P is true just in case P belongs to a coherent set of propositions. Now, it's fairly common to take coherence to be a guide to truth or an indicator of truth. So it's often thought that a good criterion for determining whether a proposition is true is to see whether it coheres with our other beliefs. Indeed, some philosophers hold that the justification of a belief just consists in its coherence with other beliefs. There are coherentist views of justification. But in this video, we're talking about truth, not justification. So when I talk about coherence theory here, this is a claim about the nature of truth. The coherence theory of truth says that what it is for a proposition to be true just is for it to cohere with other propositions. Truth is coherence, so coherence is not simply an indicator of truth. Coherence is constitutive of truth. That's a bit more controversial than coherence theories of justification, but we'll see why people believe it in this video. Okay then, a quick advert. If you like my channel, you can support me on Patreon. I will be uploading bonus videos there, so if you want to hear further thoughts on these topics, then sign up to that. I offer private tutoring. Send me an email if you're interested, and of course the Discord link will be in the description. Okay, so the coherence theory of truth. The basic idea, as I've expressed it, is pretty simple. Truth is coherence. That immediately raises the question, what exactly is coherence? Well, there isn't really any consensus on this. Different versions of coherence theory can be generated by providing different accounts of the coherence relation. But I think there are three features of coherence that almost any coherentist is going to affirm. So I'll outline this basic concept of coherence here. So first of all, it's generally agreed that a necessary condition for coherence is logical consistency. For a set of propositions to be coherent, at the very least, that set of propositions must be logically consistent. The set must not entail a contradiction. It must not entail a proposition of the form P and not P. But it's pretty clear that consistency alone isn't going to be enough, because there are many sets of propositions that are logically consistent. Consider the propositions: the moon is made of cheese, snow is blue, I am a giant pink elephant. Well, that's a consistent set. Nothing in those propositions entails a contradiction. Indeed, the world could have been such that those propositions were true. The moon could have been made of cheese, right? So, okay, there's no contradiction here. But again, we don't want to say that these propositions are true just because there's a consistent set like this. So there's two additional features that coherence is going to involve. A second requirement is that the coherent set must, in some sense, be complete. It must offer a full picture of the world. One way to spell this out more formally would be to say that the coherent set must be maximally consistent. So if a set of propositions is maximally consistent, this is to say that it contains as many propositions as it can without becoming inconsistent. If you were to add another proposition to the set, then you would have an inconsistency, no matter what that other proposition is. Now, of course, a maximally consistent set of propositions would be infinite. Since we are finite beings, we cannot hold a maximally consistent set of propositions in our minds. So we can already see that our actual beliefs can only ever have degrees of coherence. We can only ever believe parts of this maximally coherent set. But, so again, we might not have to understand completeness in terms of maximally coherent, but there's in terms of maximal coherence, but there's some sense in which the coherent set needs to be complete. It needs to give a full picture of what's going on, unlike those three random propositions I asserted just a minute ago. So, third, coherence involves relations of support between the propositions in the set. Propositions can be consistent even though they have nothing to do with each other, and so we saw that with the three propositions I gave. I mean, I can say the moon is made of cheese, or snow is blue. I can say those two propositions. They're consistent, but they have no obvious relation to each other. Coherence requires that each proposition in the set supports the other propositions. Now, there are different ways of spelling out what this support involves. According to Blanchard, for instance, coherence requires that every proposition in the set is entailed by every other proposition. He says, and I quote, "No proposition would be arbitrary. Every proposition would be entailed by the others jointly and even singly." And again, he says that a coherent system would be one in which every judgment entailed and was entailed by the rest of the system. So this is a very strong claim. On Blanchard's view, a true proposition would logically entail all other true propositions, and it would be logically entailed by any one of them. This is to say that affirming any one of the propositions while denying any of the others would be contradictory. So on this account, probably none of the propositions we believe are strictly speaking true. If you take something that you think is true, say snow is white, well, clearly that does not logically entail all other truths. Snow is white does not logically entail, that I am a human being, for instance. Snow is white does not logically entail that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. So snow is white is not, it doesn't logically entail other truths. So yeah, that's not going to be, strictly speaking, true. Now, Blanchard recognises that we do not currently have, and probably never will develop, a system of beliefs in which every belief is entailed by all the others, though he does cite mathematical systems like Euclidean geometry as the closest exemplars. In Euclidean geometry, we start out with a very simple set of axioms from which the whole complex system is derived. Of course, even Euclidean geometry is not perfectly coherent because Euclidean geometry is very far from complete. It applies only to a very restricted domain. It doesn't say everything there is to say. But, this is a system where we do have these relations of logical entailment between different parts of the system. Richard Kirkham, in his book Theories of Truth, summarises Blanchard's theory as follows. P is true, if and only if P is a member of a consistent set of beliefs that together give a complete picture of the world and individually entail each of the others. So, as I said, on this account, snow is white is not, strictly speaking, true. Indeed, presumably none of our beliefs are strictly speaking true. Moreover, it's not clear that it would even be possible to state truths in our actual language. Blanchard's coherent set, where each proposition logically entails each other proposition and where it gives a complete picture of the world, that presumably would involve different concepts, completely different concepts than what are available in our language. So, our actual beliefs can only ever be more or less coherent, which means they can only ever be more or less true. So there are degrees of truth. As Blanchard puts it, a given judgment is true in the degree to which its content could maintain itself in the light of a completed system of knowledge, false in the degree to which its appearance there would require transformation. Now, Blanchard would probably think that something like snow is white, if you can't really imagine this perfectly coherent set, but there's this coherent set where each belief logically entails the others. Snow is white, there's going to be a sort of a kind of distorted mirror of that in that set of propositions. There's going to be something like it, so it has some degree of truth. For 1 + 1 = 2, well, there's going to be something very much like it in that completed set of propositions. But again, neither of those is going to appear within that set, perfectly. So we only ever have degrees of truth. Now, that's one way then of thinking about these relations of support between propositions. Most coherentists, though, are probably not going to require that coherence involves logical entailment. So on a weaker conception of coherence, all that is required is that there are systematic explanatory relations between the propositions in the set. And contemporary science provides a pretty good exemplar of this kind of system. So our best scientific theories exhibit a number of explanatory virtues. Scientists aim for theories that are empirically adequate, that is, they make predictions that are subsequently observed, they tell us the right things about what we will observe. Theories that are simple, theories that do not make ad hoc assumptions, and importantly, theories that unify disparate phenomena under the same laws. Think of how Newtonian mechanics can explain both the swing of a pendulum and the orbit of the planets. If you just take them at face value, they're very different things. Why would the movement? The movement of a pendulum is a completely different thing to the orbit of the planets. But using Newtonian mechanics, we can take these two seemingly disparate things and draw a very deep explanatory connection between them. We can show that these two very different things follow from the same laws. Or think about how evolutionary theory explains both what we find in the fossil record when we dig up fossils, and it explains facts about the anatomical traits of different species, such as the shared bone structures in the forelimbs of mammals. So again, we have quite different phenomena, different processes being unified under a single theory. And of course, each of these theories explains many, many, many other things as well. We have in a good scientific theory, we have this ability to unify all sorts of different things, seemingly diverse phenomena. So we're drawing explanatory connections between different phenomena. Moreover, there are systematic connections between different areas of science. If we want to properly understand how biological systems operate, we're going to have to appeal to chemistry. Because you need to understand the biochemistry, so we need to appeal to models from chemistry, and to properly understand the chemistry, we need to appeal to physics. Moreover, if you were to try to look at the sort of development of life over time, well, you're going to have to appeal to astronomy in order to understand things like asteroid impacts. So to understand biology, you kind of have to reach into other sciences and appeal to their models. So if you were to alter some aspect of any well-established theory, say, if you were to deny the standard model of particle physics, or deny the modern evolutionary synthesis, or deny the Big Bang hypothesis, whatever, this is going to have ramifications throughout the rest of science. You would have to make significant adjustments elsewhere. So modifying the standard model in particle physics would probably force us to modify the Big Bang model of the origin of the universe. At the very least, we would have to go and revisit it, because the Big Bang model is partly based on what we know in particle physics. Similarly, if evidence arose that the Big Bang model was just completely wrong, we might well have to revisit what we think about particle physics. So whenever new scientific models are developed, scientists will synthesize the results from a variety of other well-tested theories and models across different disciplines. And when a scientist encounters a puzzling phenomenon, it's not enough to come up with just any explanation that sounds good. No, the explanation must fit together with our other well-established theories. So this gives us a rather different picture of coherence, because science does not exhibit relations of logical entailment between these different theories. Instead, there are relations of of explanatory support. So the point is that it's not so much that the standard model in particle physics logically entails the Big Bang, but it's that if you take the standard model in particle physics plus all of the assumptions we have elsewhere in the rest of science, then if you were to then deny the Big Bang, that would be it would be a much worse explanation. It would just not exhibit these theoretical virtues and so on. Anyway, this is, again, a slightly different picture of what coherence involves. Now, regardless of how exactly coherence is defined, the key idea is that truth is going to be determined by these sorts of principles of rationality. Truth is not ultimately a matter of corresponding to a mind-independent reality. So if you consider an ideal theory, a theory that is consistent, that is empirically adequate, so it's been tested against all possible observations, and it has these deep explanations and explanatory connections between its different parts, could this theory be mistaken? Well, a correspondence theorist will say yes. In principle, even an ideal theory could fail to match the facts, right? Even if we do everything right, even if we are like perfectly rational and we do everything we're supposed to do, we could still be wrong. Maybe we're being deceived by an evil demon or whatever. But for the coherence theorist, by contrast, there is nothing more to truth than meeting these standards of rationality, right? So a coherence theorist will say, no, an ideal theory cannot be wrong. An ideal theory must be true because, truth just is what would be asserted in such an ideal theory, right? By meeting these standards of coherence, those standards of coherence just are constitutive of what truth is. So this ideal theory would be true. Right, so it's worth making a distinction between two different ways of being a coherence theorist. We've seen that for the coherence theorist, truth is defined in terms of a coherent set of propositions, but in practice, nobody has such a coherent set in their mind. Our actual beliefs are only partially coherent. And this raises a question of how we are to understand the truth of our actual beliefs, or at least the actual beliefs that we take to be true. So like I take it, for instance, that snow is white, and I take it that this is true, but what does it mean to say that this is true, given that my actual beliefs are only partially coherent? Well, broadly speaking, there are two different ways of elaborating on coherence theory here. So take some proposition that we assume is true. Snow is white, right? I believe that snow is white. I want to say that's a true belief. What does this mean? Well, one option is to say that snow is white is merely partially true, or it has some degree of truth, and that's because my actual set of beliefs, of which this belief is a part, my actual set of beliefs are only partially coherent. As my whole set of beliefs becomes more coherent, individual beliefs like snow is white gain a greater degree of coherence. But since my beliefs are never going to be perfectly coherent, these individual beliefs are also never going to be, strictly speaking, true. So I do not have any beliefs that are, strictly speaking, true, because ultimately, I suppose it's like the truth is going to be determined by this whole set, right? So this is a more kind of holistic view, where it's like you look at the whole set first of all, and the truth is kind of attributed to that whole set, and then individual beliefs gain their truth by virtue of being part of this whole set. So since my whole set of beliefs is only partially coherent, my individual beliefs are only partially true. This would have been Blanchard's view. The second option, though, is to say, well, snow is white already is part of the maximally coherent set. It's just that I don't believe everything from the maximally coherent set. But snow is white is part of the maximally coherent set, so snow is white just is true. I, therefore, can have beliefs that are just true. And this is, I don't need to believe everything in the set. As long as you believe some proposition in that set, you have a true belief. So there's this like set of propositions that is maximally coherent, and provided you believe propositions from that set, you have true beliefs. So this would allow us to say that some of our beliefs are indeed just true. The distinction between these different ways of thinking about truth is not going to be important going forward, but again, I just wanted to flag up that this is a point of debate within coherence theory. Different coherence theories can take different views here. We might say that our actual beliefs are only partially true because our set of beliefs is only partially coherent, or we might say, well, no, the beliefs that we have may well be part of a maximally coherent set, and that's what matters, and that's what makes them just true, even though our actual beliefs are only partially coherent. Right, well, that's the coherence theory. Why believe coherence theory? Well, I think much of the appeal of coherence theory comes as a response to the problems of correspondence theory. Recall in particular the no access problem for correspondence theory. For the correspondence theorist, the truth conditions of a proposition, so the conditions under which the proposition is true, are facts. They are states of affairs in the world. But the worry is that we have no access to such facts, to such states of affairs, at least as the correspondence theorist conceives of them. So the worry is this. What I have access to are experiences, thoughts, memories, emotions, beliefs, perceptions, etc. Right? I have access to all of these things, but I can't ever like step outside of my mind and just see the facts. So I'm never going to be able to take a belief on the one hand and then the facts on the other and check that they correspond. So the worry is that correspondence theory makes truth inaccessible to us. For the coherence theory, this doesn't seem to be much of a problem. The truth conditions of a proposition are other propositions, and it's easy to see how we can confirm whether the relations between our beliefs are coherent. Right? I can check whether two beliefs are consistent, whether they have explanatory connections to one another. And there's no need to, step outside of my mind and check what the facts are. So for coherence theory, all that matters is relations between my beliefs. And that's something that is accessible to me. It's directly accessible. I just have those beliefs and I can see how they relate to each other. So it avoids this no access problem. And I think that there is something intuitive about what the coherence theorist is saying here. Consider how we would proceed in practice if we were asked of some true proposition, what makes it true? So take the proposition, Joe Biden is president of the US. Assume that this is true. Now we can ask, what makes it true? What makes that proposition true? Now as a philosopher I might say something like, well, it corresponds to the facts. But in more everyday contexts, that's not the kind of answer we're looking for. Instead, to answer that question, I would simply cite other propositions that I believe that are connected to this proposition in question. So I would describe the system of the US government, the outcome of the 2020 election. I would describe the facts about the person who is referred to by the name Joe Biden, and so on. So if you ask me what makes it true that Joe Biden is president of the US, well, I would cite my other beliefs concerning Joe Biden, concerning the US government and the electoral system, and so on. I wouldn't simply display the facts. Indeed, it's not clear what it would even mean to say that I display the facts. Like, what is that? No, like, when you ask me what makes this true, right, I'm just going to cite other beliefs. So if you think, like, okay, in practice, what makes it true that Joe Biden is president of the US? Well, other propositions. That seems to be what's playing the role of making that true, right? I cite other propositions that display the relevant type of connections to this proposition, and that's it. That's as much as we can ever do. Another point in favour of coherence theory, along similar lines here, concerns the relation between truth and justification. So one of the things I've been making clear in these videos so far is that we have to draw a distinction between a test of truth, or the criteria of truth, and a definition of truth. So, you know, the criteria that we use for judging whether or not a proposition is true that's not necessarily the same as what makes a proposition true. But we might question whether these can be separated so cleanly, and in fact Blanchard argues that these cannot be treated as entirely separate. So Blanchard says, and I quote, "Would the mere fact that such elements as these are coherently arranged prove that anything corresponding to them exists out there? I cannot see that it would. And this difficulty is typical. If you place the nature of truth in one sort of character, and its test in something quite different, you are pretty certain sooner or later to find the two falling apart. In the end, the only test of truth that is not misleading is the special nature or character that is constitutive of truth." And for Blanchard here, a test of truth must be such that whatever passes that test has been proven to be true. It's not enough that passing the test is a mere indicator of truth. And I mean, there is a point to this, right? So maybe it's fine to say that there are some tests that are merely indicative of truth. You know, there are some tests that merely show that a proposition is probably true. So in that case, we would indeed want to distinguish between a test of truth and the definition of truth. But imagine we had a test that was perfect. Imagine we had a test where everything that has some property P that passes the test is shown to be true, and everything that lacks P, so it fails the test, is shown to be false. So this is a test that's picking out some property P, and we're taking it that everything that passes this test is true, and everything that fails this test is false. Well then, what more could there be to truth than property P? Now, coherence, as understood by the coherence theorist, is not merely a test that is indicative of truth. It is an ideal test of truth. There is no better test imaginable, because once we've established that our beliefs are ideally coherent, in the sense described by the coherence theorist, where it is consistency, completeness, and deep explanatory relations, once we've established that our beliefs are coherent in that sense, there is, in principle, nothing further that we could do. So the idea is, coherence is a perfect test of truth. It's the best test of truth. But there can't be a distinction between a perfect test of truth and what is constitutive of truth. I mean, otherwise, we really do end up committed to a sort of global skepticism. If truth is something beyond coherence, so that even an ideally coherent theory could be false, then we actually have no way of identifying when we've acquired true beliefs. Yeah, I mean, because there's just nothing more we could do. There's nothing more we could do than establish the coherence of our beliefs. So these sorts of considerations motivate coherence theory. Okay then, let's turn to some problems for coherence theory. A first concern is that it is simply wishful thinking to suppose that the truth is coherent, that our standards of rationality successfully track the truth. The thought here is truth can transcend any of our standards of rationality. So, I mean, look, maybe we can be confident that the truth is consistent, though, of course, this has been challenged by dialetheists who argue that there are true contradictions. So we probably shouldn't be completely confident, even of consistency. But let's just grant consistency, okay? Well, as we've seen, coherence also requires these explanatory relations. But can we really assume, prior to inquiry, that truth is always going to be coherent in this sense, that there will always be these deep explanatory connections between the different true propositions? I mean, why shouldn't there be brute facts, unexplained regularities, parts of science that are isolated from other parts, and so on? I mean, sure, perhaps that would not be ideal, perhaps that would be somewhat unlovely, But where's the guarantee that nature is supposed to be lovely, right? Surely it's an open question whether there are brute facts and unexplained regularities or isolated parts of science. It seems like this isn't something we should just rule out from the start, but the coherence theorist does indeed rule it out right from the start. Or consider propositions about inaccessible parts of the universe. So take the proposition, beyond the observable universe, about 90 billion light years distance from us, there is a galaxy containing exactly 71 billion stars. Well, that proposition is either true or false, or so it seems. But if it's true, it can't be made true by coherence. Similarly, if its negation is true, then that negation can't be made true by coherence, because neither this proposition nor its negation coheres with any of our beliefs, nor could it ever cohere with any of our other beliefs, no matter how much we learn about the world, right? It's just the information that would determine whether we judge this true or false is just inaccessible to us. And so it's not just that we don't know the answer to this, we don't know whether this proposition is true. Our best system of beliefs explicitly tells us that the fact of the matter about this proposition is inaccessible to us. So this could never be made coherent with our best system of beliefs. I mean, assuming, of course, that our understanding of physics is at least approximately correct. Obviously, that might change, but we're probably always going to be able to state propositions like this, right? Propositions that are inaccessible, right? So our system of beliefs, our best, even if it were made like ideally coherent, it just wouldn't tell us anything about this proposition. Look, earlier I suggested that in practice, when we are asked what makes a proposition true, we will cite other propositions that we accept. But, look, even in everyday contexts, it doesn't seem as though the relation that a proposition bears to other propositions is enough on its own to make a proposition true. As Paul Fagard once put it, and I quote, "The aim of representation should be to describe the world, not just relate to other representations." When I assert that something is true, am I not making a claim about the world, about the way things are independent of me? I don't seem to just be talking about some other beliefs that I hold. Of course, in practice, all I can do to support a truth claim is to cite my other beliefs. But it doesn't follow from that all I mean when I say a proposition is true is that this proposition bears certain relations to other beliefs. And there is something puzzling about the idea that truth could just consist in these relations to other beliefs. Okay, perhaps the most famous objection to coherence theory is the many systems problem. So it seems that there could be different systems that each provide complete pictures of the world that are inconsistent with each other, but internally coherent. So each system of propositions is consistent, it has a deep explanatory structure, but each system says very different things. In fact, it seems that almost any proposition that you care to imagine could be made to be part of a coherent system of propositions, just as long as you adjust the rest of the system in the right kind of way. So clearly, okay, so I want to say snow is white, but clearly I could say snow is blue, and then I could just sort of adjust the other propositions about the world so that that proposition, snow is blue, is part of a coherent system. If this is the case, then on coherence theory, it looks like almost any proposition could come out as being true. So this objection, I think, gets at what most philosophers find implausible about coherence theory. A Sherlock Holmes novel could have a fair degree of internal coherence. And actually, most novels do have a fair degree of internal coherence. Most novels are going to be consistent. Most novels are going to have a kind of narrative thread running through them. With most novels, they're going to, if they're good novels, at least, a good novel is going to present a sort of richly described world. So it's going to have a fair degree of internal coherence, but that doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it anywhere close to being true. Moreover, I could take I could take a Sherlock Holmes novel and then extend the story indefinitely. I can add more and more and more propositions so that I end up with a complete description of a possible world, including detailed descriptions of the scientific laws governing that world and so on. But again, that wouldn't make the story true. It wouldn't make it even close to the truth. If there could be many different coherent systems of propositions, then at minimum, the coherence theorist appears to be committed to relativism about truth. And relativism is obviously a very controversial position, to say the least. Any proposition could be true relative to some system or other. So it seems the coherence theorist is going to be committed to some sort of relativism, and a lot of philosophers take that to be a problem. But actually, the situation here is a bit worse, because it looks like the coherence theorist actually has no way to distinguish the truth from a sufficiently well elaborated fiction. So the very distinction between truth and fiction collapses. So this is taken to be a very serious problem for coherence theory. Now, one response to this is that coherence needs to be understood as including not just propositions and beliefs, but other representational states, like our perceptual states. So yes, of course, a mere system of propositions floating free from anything else, that could not make anything true. But the propositions that we accept are constrained by our experiences, by our perceptions. And that's the distinction between a fiction and a theory. A theory must answer to the tribunal of experience. There is no such requirement in the case of fiction. So the obvious problem with taking the Sherlock Holmes story to be true is obvious. If you go to 221B Baker Street, you're not going to find a brilliant detective living there. We know what sorts of... there are certain sets of observations that would count as revealing a detective, and you don't find those, you're not going to make those observations when you go to 221B Baker Street. So the story may well be consistent, and it may well provide a very richly described world and all of this, but the fact is, it is not coherent. It isn't consistent with other relevant representational states. It's not consistent with what I perceive, and so it isn't true. When you write a fiction, you state propositions that contradict the representational states found in experience, and that's why fiction can never be ideally coherent, and therefore it can't be true. So that's one sort of move, right? The idea is that, well, there's not going to be just an endless variety of different coherent systems, because part of what's required for coherence is going to include representational states like perceptual states, and so that's going to significantly narrow the available coherent systems. Now, of course, it seems unlikely that even this requirement is going to deliver a unique coherent system, a single coherent system. There are, underdetermination is, a significant problem in philosophy of science and other areas of philosophy, right? So there are going to be multiple different theories that are at least consistent with our perceptions. Moreover, another issue here is that experience itself is theory-laden. There are going to be many different ways of describing what it is that is given in experience, or what these representational states of experience are. So consider, for instance, the many different ways of classifying color experience. Different languages carve up color in different ways. There are languages where what we call blue and green are classed as the same color. There are languages where what we call dark blue is grouped with black, while light blue is grouped with other colors. So there are languages that don't have a concept corresponding to blue. So, okay, if you ask, like, well, what is the color of this cup? You're going to get different answers depending on how you're carving up color space. So arguably then, experience does not provide a fixed foundation. There are going to be multiple different ways of describing what it is that's given in experience, and again, then that's going to... So first of all, even if you were to assume that experience provides a fixed foundation, there are probably going to be multiple different theories that are coherent with that. And moreover, experience doesn't provide such a fixed foundation. There are going to be multiple different ways of describing what there is in experience. So the many systems problem remains a problem even when you say that coherence needs to include these other representational states. Okay, another objection is the circularity problem. As we've seen, coherence theorists appeal to notions like consistency and entailment in defining truth. Pretty much all coherentists agree that a necessary condition for P to be true is that P is part of a set of beliefs that are consistent. But, of course, we can only know that a set of beliefs is consistent if we know it does not entail a contradiction, a statement of the form P and not P. Right? What it is for a set of beliefs to be consistent is that this set of beliefs does not entail a contradiction. So if we're asking whether our beliefs are true, one important question is, well, does this set of beliefs entail a contradiction? But now, what exactly is entailment? The standard answer is that P entails Q if and only if it is impossible for P to be true and Q to be false. But now notice, entailment is being defined in terms of truth, in which case coherence theory seems to be circular. The coherence theorist says truth is coherence. Now, a necessary condition for coherence is that the set of beliefs do not entail a contradiction. But without a prior conception of the conditions under which any given beliefs are true or false, we can't say anything about what those beliefs entail. Right? So the coherence, to be coherent, the set of beliefs must not entail a contradiction. But like, what is it that do the beliefs entail a contradiction? Well, that's going to depend on what truth and falsehood is. At least if we understand coherence, at least if we understand entailment as the idea that P entails Q if and only if it is impossible for P to be true and Q to be false. So you need to have some prior conception of truth in order to say what entailment is. Okay, so one option here is to define entailment merely in terms of particular inference rules. So to put this more formally, this is the distinction between semantic entailment, which appeals to notions like truth, and syntactic entailment, which is defined in terms of rules of inference. But anyway, putting that aside, the point is that the coherence theorist might offer a different definition of what it is for one belief to entail another. So she could say, well, P entails Q just in case Q can be derived from P via the application of one or more rules of inference to P. So we're not saying anything about truth here, right? We're just asking what follows from particular rules. So there is the rule of conjunction elimination, which says that from the proposition A and B, you may derive the proposition A, or you may derive the proposition B. Right? That's why it's conjunction elimination. From a conjunction, you may derive either of the conjuncts. Or the rule of modus ponens. From the proposition if A then B, and the proposition A, you may derive the proposition B. So, we can determine what is entailed by a particular system of beliefs simply by applying these rules. There's no need to say anything about whether the beliefs can be jointly true, right? Like, we figure out whether P entails Q by just, applying these rules, right? It's just a simple algorithm. We don't need to have any conception of what counts as true or false. And then the point is, if we apply these rules and then we get something of the form P and not P, then okay, we know that we have a contradiction, and we know that the beliefs are not consistent. The problem with this kind of move is that we can stipulate all sorts of utterly absurd inference rules. So I can stipulate the rule that from the proposition A and B, you may derive not A, or you may derive not B. Or I can stipulate that from the proposition if A then B and the proposition A, you may derive not B. Or indeed, I could even stipulate that from the proposition A, you may derive not A. Now, obviously, if you were to apply inference rules like these, then every system of beliefs would come out as being incoherent, because they would be inconsistent. I mean, more generally, the issue is that with different inference rules, different systems will be judged to be coherent. So clearly what we need is some way of distinguishing the correct inference rules from the incorrect rules. But again, this is going to introduce circularity. For the coherence theorist, inference rules are correct only if they are part of a coherent system of beliefs. But whether a system is coherent depends on the inference rules that are used to assess what the beliefs entail. So we have, okay, an inference rule counts as correct only if it's part of the coherent system, but what makes a system coherent is going to depend on the inference rules used to determine what follows within that system. So as Bertrand Russell puts it, the laws of logic supply the skeleton or framework within which the test of coherence applies, and they cannot themselves be established by this test. So the challenge is, if you want to have, you're going to need the laws of logic, you're going to need inference rules to figure out, not just to figure out, but to determine what is coherent. For anything to be coherent, there needs to be certain inference rules in place. But then those inference rules themselves can't be established by coherence. Those inference rules must be correct, like independently of coherence. And in that case, coherence theory is not coherence theory is falsified. At the very least, it's not going to be a theory of truth that applies across the board. Okay, a final difficulty, which is discussed by Richard Kirkham in his book on theories of truth, is the regress problem. Okay, suppose I affirm that P is true. What this means, according to the coherence theorist, is that P coheres with the designated set. Well, now consider the proposition P coheres with the designated set. Well, that's true, and its truth consists in the fact that it coheres with the designated set. So P coheres with the designated set, coheres with the designated set. Now, obviously, this can go on indefinitely. So we have an indefinite set of propositions of this form. P coheres with the designated set, P coheres with the designated set, coheres with the designated set, and so on, again, indefinitely. Now, this is fine in itself. The problem, Kirkham says, is that we can substitute any proposition we like for P. So we could say, for instance, the moon is made of cheese. And then we could say, the proposition, the moon is made of cheese, coheres with the designated set. And so on. And again, we have this indefinite list. I mean, clearly, there is a proposition of the form, the moon is made of cheese, coheres with the designated set. Right? So that proposition is perfectly meaningful, perfectly intelligible. The coherence theorist does not have a problem with stating that proposition. Indeed, what the coherence theorist will say is, well, yes, that's a perfectly legitimate proposition, it's just false. So the moon is made of cheese, coheres with the designated set. Yeah, we can all understand that, it's totally intelligible, it's just false. Because the moon is made of cheese does not really cohere with the designated set, and the true propositions are those that do really cohere with the designated set. But Kirkham asks, well, for the coherence theorist, what on earth can it mean to say that P really does, or really does not, cohere with the designated set? I mean, it can't mean that there's some mind-independent fact whether P coheres with the designated set. Instead, all the coherence theorist is saying is, P coheres with the designated set, coheres with the designated set. And obviously that doesn't help here, right? So what the coherence theorist wants to say concerning our proposition, the moon is made of cheese, is, so the moon is made of cheese, coheres with the designated set. The coherence theorist wants to say that's false. That actually, and it's false because it doesn't cohere with the designated set. But But the problem is that, well, look, I can state the proposition the moon is made of cheese coheres with a designated set, and then I'm also going to have the proposition that the moon is made of cheese coheres with a designated set coheres with a designated set. And again, those propositions can just be stated indefinitely. If Kirkham is right, then the coherence theorist has no way to distinguish true propositions from any other random propositions. Because for any proposition P, there will be a proposition asserting that it coheres with the designated set. And then we can, and so then if you ask whether that proposition is true, we can just move up a level and find a proposition which states the proposition P coheres with the designated set coheres with the designated set. And then we can move up a level again and find a proposition that states P coheres with the designated set, coheres with the designated set, coheres with the designated set, and so on. Now, the coherence theorist is going to want to say that these propositions are false, at least when P is something like the moon is made of cheese. They're going to want to say, no, the moon is made of cheese does not really cohere with the designated set. But it seems in order to do that, they're going to have to invoke a mind-independent fact that the moon is made of cheese does not cohere with the designated set, right? So it is a fact that, that's the reason, right? So the moon is made of cheese. It, in fact, does not cohere with the designated set. But it seems like the force of that, in fact, has to be appealing to, literally, the mind-independent facts. But now truth is not going to merely be cashed out in terms of coherence. Okay, well, that is the coherence theory of truth. Hope you found that interesting. I will see you in the next video, and as I said, I will have a few further things to say about this, which you can find on my Patreon. I will be uploading further commentary on this on there. So yeah, check that out if you're interested in more. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.